basis of the entire narrative, that's the judicial thing. Now, you introduce that it's informational purpose. More about damn legal investigation. But the Biden administration has extended the interpretation of that, just disrupting the counting of college, also this law. You have the idea you can illegal to protest anything if you say the protesters disrupt. And remember, they didn't disrupt them that much because they still counted the electoral college votes that day. What, did they delay them by a couple hours? Now it says this debate could soon head to the Supreme Court on this is going to be, and it's now considering hearing defendants. If it rules in the favor of these three defendants, the Supreme Court, this will act as a major blow, not only against the core argument being used to target January 6ers, but it will also break a key legal argument to politics as this. Trump's lawyers argue that the indictment takes a statute that's directed at the destruction of records and accounting fraud, and then takes that and applies it to people trying to interfere with the elections. They say that, quote, this stretches the statutory language of any plausible mooring to its text, which violates the canons of avoidance, lenity, and restraint discussed above. And in the case or cases, if these are taken up by the Supreme Court, they're saying one of the individuals, a former prosecutor, is telling NBC News that Trump could credibly ask to delay his trial until the case is resolved. And this could push Trump's trial past election day 2024, but it might not, they're saying. She said that if the Supreme Court steps in, the decision would probably come before the end of June, and the trial could still happen before November. But here's the part most of the establishment media is not saying. It says this as well. The Supreme Court intervening in the January 6 cases could set up a domino effect where similar overcharges for defendants would be more highly struck. Most of the legacy news has been cut. The Supreme Court intervened in Donald Trump's guilt because they assume
twist the narrative.
They're making it sound like the Supreme Court is taking just totalitarian action to defend and protect Donald Trump because Donald Trump appointed these conservative justices. That's the narrative they're going with. But what's really interesting is if you read most of their articles, they don't have the complete information. The most, I read several of them, the most they'll tell you is they'll say, basically, that if the Supreme Court, rules on this, that it will delay the prosecution of Trump. That's the narrative. They omit the part where they say that if the court actually overturns it, if the court rules in favor of the defendants, that this eliminates that key argument, that key, over-interpretation of disrupting an official proceeding made for Enron, that changing I think going back to the original meaning of it, would break the entire January 6th narrative because it is such a fragile narrative. My assumption is that because they know it's such a delicate issue, because if people understand the way that they're reinterpreting the Enron charge to go after people who are protesting the counting of electoral college votes when they believe the election was stolen, which I believe it was, by the way, they're not telling people that. These mainstream news, they're not explaining that to people, nor are they explaining the implications of if it is, again, brought back to that original interpretation, because that means the entire January 6th narrative is dead. The entire narrative that Trump interfered with democracy, the entire narrative that Trump was a threat to the peaceful transfer of power, the entire narrative that Trump represents that is dead. Not only dead, but it means that all the people who are charged with it, every person who went to prison, all of them are not only going to have their cases re-examined, re-scrutinized, whatever you want to call it, but they could probably sue. They could probably sue the government. They could find ways to get justice for themselves. And when Trump promises, that he is your retribution, he actually did say that, by the way, I assume he's referring to things like this. So, interesting times we're in.
That was a shooting gallery up there.
I could hear the tremble in his voice.
She suffered a very severe beating. The video is pretty graphic.
Justice for us seems almost impossible.